Vivek Ramaswamy, Republican presidential candidate, author of a brand new book called Capitalist Punishment. Get the book in a moment here. Good morning to you. Here's a clip from the president yesterday. He was talking in Washington, D.C. about his hunt for a second term. Watch.
Our economic plan is working. We now have to finish the job. Meanwhile, guess what my MAGA Republican friends in Congress are up to? Same old trickle-down dressed up in MAGA clothing.
He mentioned MAGA several times. You called him a hollowed-out husk yesterday.
That's right. I think it's a farce that Biden is actually the one running for president. Nominally, he is. But the essence of what's going on is this is the managerial class putting up their puppet, their stooge. And when you see it that way, it starts to make sense, where his cognitive deficits, right, that's not a bug to them. That's a feature, just like it is of John Fetterman, because it lends him more easily to capture and control from the people who are actually pulling the strings. Notice Susan Rice stepping down just the day before he declares, right? The people who are actually driving the agenda have a very convenient front man, and the more independent thinking he is, the more difficult it would be for them. So once we see that, everything else, I think, starts to make more sense. Biden's not really running for president. That's where I'm at on this.
Okay, so that's what you think, but let's talk about the economy for a second, because that's what he wanted to do yesterday. So you've been out meeting with voters.
Yes.
And when the Democrats say that abortion is the big issue on the table, and they're worried about MAGA Republicans, you've met with voters, and I'm assuming there are some people that you meet that are maybe on the fence, independent voters, especially like when you go to Iowa.
Yep.
What do they say is the most important issue? And I look at this here, call for number 2. Stock market decline in value since Biden took office is $687 billion.
So the economy is a huge issue to voters, including in places not just Iowa, but across the country, including in New Hampshire. I'm going to South Carolina later this week. Now, some will say that you can't blame a U.S. president for the stock market, but in this case, here's why you can. Because inflation actually created the conditions for the Fed to have to hike rates as rapidly as they have. That's directly the cause of the stock market declining. So this does fall on Biden's feet. I think the other thing people are hungry for is a revival of our national self-confidence. We've lost that. People aren't proud of our country. But you know how one of the conditions that makes it easier to be proud of a country is where people are making more money. And so Democrats will talk about tax increases. Republicans may debate spending cuts. It's as though we've forgotten there's a better way to solve this. GDP growth itself, economic growth, getting Biden out of the White House and somebody who actually understands this in the White House. That's why I'm running, is a key step to that.
I think your background's interesting, too, and you've been an American success story, so you can talk about that positive outlook. Yeah. But back to part of the question that Dana was going at. The issue of abortion is out there.
Yes.
Nikki Haley was talking about it yesterday. As governor, she signed a bill that would ban abortion after 20 weeks. She made an exception for a mother's life, but no exception for rape or incest. She thinks a federal law should be implemented. Donald Trump says we should not do a federal law. Where are you on this position now?
So I come down on principle. On one hand, I am unapologetically pro-life. In fact, I've been a leading advocate of getting Roe versus Wade overturned. That was the correct decision. On the other hand, as a pro-life person, I do think that abortion is a form of murder. But if you think that murder isn't regulated by the federal government, murder is done by state statutes. That's how the Constitution works. And so for those reasons, because I view abortion as a form of murder, because I believe in the Constitution, because I believe Roe was wrongly decided, this is an issue for the states, but I also think that that's why states should adopt a pro-life stance. And what I think is more Americans are pro-life than will admit it. Clarence Thomas famously brought up the case of a woman walking down the street, pregnant woman, assaulted, fetus dies as a consequence. There isn't a person in this country that thinks that person should not be held liable. That tells me most of us are actually pro-life, even if people don't admit it.
Would you make an exception for rape, incest, or the health of the mother?
Health of the mother is an automatic exception because that's still part of being pro-life. So absolutely. And I don't think this has to be as divisive of an issue as we make it out to be. The part of the conversation I want to see is more sexual responsibility for men. We don't talk about that enough.
I'm for that, but too, but on rape and incest?
On rape and incest as well, I think those are exceptions for actually having a peaceable society around this issue. Yes, especially kids who are the subject under the age of 18 of rape. I think that's an appropriate exception
And
as well.
one more thing on this, because you're going to get them when you're up in the debate stage anyway. What is your restriction on a time period?
So, look, I think that
6 weeks? Is it 15? Is it 20? What would you support?
So, well, first of all, I want to be very clear about this. This is not an answer for the president, because I think the federal government should be out of this. But if you're a governor or you're dealing with this in the states, I can share with you my opinion on it. If life ends, right, when do brain waves end? That's how we determine when life ends on the back end. I think we should apply a consistent principle on the front end. That's around the 6-week mark that brainwaves do begin. So I think that's the right way to think about the issue at the state level. But on constitutional grounds, I've been very clear, this issue belongs to the states. Just like murder is regulated by the states, so too should it be for abortion.
Just be clear, you're in the same position that Ron DeSantis is then, based on the bill he signed last week in Florida. 6 weeks.
I think that that's a reasonable bill for him to have signed. Absolutely. But this should be an issue for the states, not for the federal government. I've been very clear about that.
A lot more to come on that. There is a poll that says young Democrats are not sold on Biden. 25% of those under the age of 45 say they would definitely support Biden in a general election, compared with 56% of older Democrats. As you're out there and you're looking at this, do you think that you could bring them over? I mean, if abortion is an issue for them as voters, and we saw that in Wisconsin in the Supreme Court election, right? Especially at the University of Wisconsin in Madison.
Yes.
The turnout rate, unbelievable. So when you look forward, if you wanted to grab some of those Democratic voters, how would you do that?
We're seeing it on the ground, Dana. We are bringing those young independents and even some young centrist Democrats. I think we're going to bring them along with us. I'm the first millennial ever to run for U.S. president.
That's interesting.
As a Republican. And one of the things I do is I go to college campuses across this country. And you want to know what I hear? They say they've invited other presidential candidates in the Republican field who won't go. And I understand why, because they get the kinds of questions that I get. But what I do, whether it's Don Lemon on CNN or a college campus, I go to the other side and debate them. But with young people in particular, what I see is they're really lost. They're hungry for a cause, for purpose and meaning. And if we can give them a positive vision, I think we bring many of those young voters along to the Republican Party.
You think that Biden is too old to run?
I think Biden is too cognitively incapable to run.
Okay,
Some older people might be capable. He's not.
I see. Okay, so you would say, so President Trump, if he's running again.
Seems perfectly fine to run to me. Okay. Yeah, President Trump does. President Biden does not.
What's the elevator pitch on the book?
So the book actually highlights this farce that we just vote every November. We don't. People vote every day with their dollars. And what we're seeing, especially under Biden, is using the private sector, capital markets through the back door to get done what they couldn't get done through the front door, using the retirement accounts of everyday Americans to vote for racial equity audits and emissions caps. That's what firms like BlackRock do, literally using your money, our money, to do it. This lifts the curtain on that scam. And I think that knowledge is the first step to empowerment. Once you see that happening with your money, it's hard to unsee it. And so I've worked on that as an entrepreneur. I wrote this book, actually, I started this company, Strive, to compete with BlackRock. I wrote this book long before I actually knew I was running for president. But now that I am, I still wanted to put it out. I'm donating all my personal proceeds to a nonprofit that's pursuing and helping pursue litigation against American Express for its racial equity audit practices that discriminated against its employees. But what I want to do is inform everyday Americans how they don't have to wait till the election. With every day their dollars, they can actually realign their actual beliefs with making money instead of pushing progressive policies.
Good to talk to you. It was a long elevator ride, longer than we thought.
Yeah.
However, we will see you down the road.
It's a brilliant title.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Capitalist punishment.
Nice to see you.
Very good.
Thank you, guys.
All right.